You've got to be kidding me. The words sliced through the maintenance hangar like a blade. Captain Hayes stood with arms crossed, staring at the 76-year-old man in a faded work shirt. Command sent you to fix a $9 million tank? Around them, engineers with advanced degrees hunched over laptops, their screens glowing with error codes they couldn't crack. For 3 days, the M1 Abrams had sat silent, its turret frozen by a phantom hydraulic fault that defied every diagnostic. The old man said nothing. He simply knelt beside the 70-ton machine, pressing his weathered hand against its cold steel hull. His eyes closed, listening. "Sir, I need you away from that vehicle," Hayes snapped, his voice sharp with frustration. "This isn't a tractor you can bang on with a wrench." From his canvas tool bag, the old man pulled out a bizarre, custom-made wrench. Crude, battle-scarred, ugly. Something he'd forged himself decades ago under very different circumstances. Hayes let out a derisive laugh. "What is that? Did you make that in your garage?" The insult hung in the air. But what the young captain didn't know would change everything. Before we continue, if you've ever been underestimated because of your age or experience, type respect below and tell me where you're watching from. This story proves that wisdom earned in the field is worth more than any diploma. I read every comment. The maintenance bay at Fort Carson was a cathedral of modern warfare. 30,000 square feet of polished concrete, fluorescent lights that never dimmed, and the perpetual smell of diesel fuel mixed with hydraulic fluid and ozone. Massive overhead cranes hung like sleeping giants, capable of lifting entire tank turrets. Along the walls, rolling tool chests stood in perfect formation, each one worth more than a new car. Filled with precision instruments calibrated to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. And in the center of it all, like a patient on an operating table, sat the M1 Abrams, 70 tons of American armor. A machine that could accelerate to 45 miles per hour, survive a direct hit from a rocket-propelled grenade, and put a 120mm depleted uranium round through 3 feet of reinforced steel from 2 miles away. Except right now, it couldn't turn its turret. For 3 days, Captain Marcus Hayes had thrown everything at this problem. Everything. He'd run the full diagnostic suite 17 times. He'd replaced 3 different hydraulic pumps, swapped out 2 electronic control modules, and personally inspected every inch of wiring in the turret traverse system. He'd brought in specialists from the Army Materiel Command. He'd video-conferenced with civilian engineers at General Dynamics. He'd even had a senior warrant officer from the armor school at Fort Benning walk him through troubleshooting procedures that weren't in any manual. Nothing worked. The diagnostic computers all said the same thing. System nominal. Pressure within acceptable parameters. No fault detected. But when you gave the command to traverse, the turret groaned like a dying animal, lurched forward 3 degrees, and stopped. Every single time. Hayes was 32 years old, a West Point graduate with a master's degree in mechanical engineering from MIT. He'd been top of his class in the Armor Officer Basic course. His fitness reports were immaculate. He was being groomed for battalion command, maybe even higher. And now, his career was stalling out just like that damn turret, because he couldn't solve one mechanical problem. The deadline was brutal, 72 hours. The battalion was scheduled to deploy to a joint training exercise in Poland. Without this tank, they'd be understrength. The battalion commander had made it crystal clear what that would mean for Hayes's career. So when Major General Clark himself had called and said he was sending someone who could help, Hayes had felt a surge of desperate hope. Maybe it was an engineer from one of the defense contractors. Maybe it was some genius civilian consultant with classified clearance. Instead, an old man had shuffled through the door. James Connor was 76 years old. He wore a flannel shirt that had seen better decades, blue jeans worn white at the knees, and work boots that looked like they'd walked across half the planet. His hands were gnarled, knuckles swollen with arthritis. Deep lines carved canyons around his eyes and mouth. He carried a canvas tool bag that looked like it belonged in a museum, and when he walked, there was a slight hitch in his step, the ghost of an old injury. Hayes had taken one look at him and felt his hope crumble into ash. "Sir, with all due respect," Hayes said, his voice tight with barely controlled frustration, "we're working with incredibly sensitive equipment here. Modern battle tanks have more computing power than the space shuttle. The hydraulic systems are controlled by computers," James said quietly, still not looking at the captain. His voice was a low rumble, rough from decades of breathing tank exhaust and desert sand. "I know. Then you understand why we need specialists. People with training on these specific systems." Hayes gestured at his team of engineers. "Everyone here has at least a bachelor's degree in mechanical or electrical engineering. Most have master's degrees. We've been through the Army's most advanced technical training courses. We've exhausted every protocol." James finished for him. He finally looked up, and his eyes, pale blue, faded like old denim, met Hayes's with a calm that bordered on pity. "You've run every test in the book, checked every sensor, replaced every component the computer told you to replace." "That's correct," Hayes said stiffly, "and it still don't work." The simple statement hung in the air. Around them, the engineering team had stopped pretending to work and were now openly watching the exchange. Sergeant First Class Rodriguez, Hayes's senior NCO, stood off to one side, arms folded, expression carefully neutral. Rodriguez was 42, a lifer who'd been turning wrenches on tanks since before Hayes was in high school. "Mr. Connor," Hayes said, making the civilian title sound like an insult, "I appreciate that the general sent you. I'm sure in your day, you had plenty of experience with mechanical systems, but these tanks are nothing like the ones from Vietnam or Desert Storm," James said. "I was in Desert Storm, tank gunner, later master gunner, M1 Abrams, same beast, just an older version." Hayes blinked. Desert Storm had been in 1991. This man would have been, what, in his 40s? Still, that was over 3 decades ago. The M1A1 and the M1A2 might share a family resemblance, but they were vastly different machines. It was like comparing a Model T to a Tesla. "That's impressive," Hayes said, not sounding impressed at all. "But as I said, the technology has advanced significantly since—" James wasn't listening anymore. He'd moved to the tank, running his hand along the smooth curve of the turret ring. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. He walked around the machine slowly, occasionally pausing to press his palm flat against the armor, his head tilted slightly, like he was listening to something no one else could hear. One of the younger engineers, a specialist named Chen, giggled nervously. Is he seriously doing the laying on of hands thing? Maybe he's a tank whisperer," another engineer muttered, and several others snickered. James ignored them. He completed his circuit of the tank and knelt, slowly, his joints protesting audibly, beside the turret base. He pulled out that strange wrench again, holding it up to the light. The welds were crude, almost primitive. The handle had been wrapped in electrical tape that was now cracked and peeling. It looked like something that had been hammered together in a junkyard. "Okay, that's enough," Hayes said, his patience finally snapping. He strode forward, boots clicking on the concrete. "Sir, I need you to step away from the tank. Now, this is a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment, not a—" 1991, James said suddenly, his voice distant. "February 26th, about 4 a.m. We called her Bad Penny. She was a good tank, saved our lives more than once." Hayes stopped, confused by the non-sequitur. "What?" "That's when I made this." James held up the ugly wrench. "During the ground war, we'd been in combat for about 30 hours straight. Took incoming fire from an Iraqi T-72. Round didn't penetrate, but the impact damaged the turret traverse system. We were stuck. Couldn't rotate the gun. Sitting duck. The maintenance bay had gone quiet. Even the engineers who'd been snickering had stopped. The standard tools couldn't reach the problem, James continued, his voice soft but carrying in the silence. The angle was wrong. The space was too tight. And we had maybe 10 minutes before enemy reinforcements arrived. So I took a piece of steel from a destroyed Iraqi vehicle, welded it to a socket wrench with our field repair kit, and made this. He turned the wrench over in his hands, his expression distant, lost in memory. Saved our lives that night, and I've kept it ever since. Used it maybe a dozen times over the years for problems just like this one. Problems that shouldn't exist according to the diagnostics. Problems that the computers can't see. Sergeant Rodriguez had moved closer, his expression thoughtful. He was old enough to remember Desert Storm, old enough to have heard the stories. "Master Gunner," he said quietly. "You were a master gunner?" James nodded once. "What unit?" "3rd Armored Division, 4th Battalion, 32nd Armor Regiment." Rodriguez's eyes widened. He looked at Hayes, then back at James. "Sir, the 432 Armor. They were at the Battle of 73 Easting. That was where we engaged the Iraqi Republican Guard," James said. "Fought for about 23 minutes. When it was done, our battalion had destroyed over 160 enemy vehicles and taken no losses." Hayes felt something shift in the room. The mockery had evaporated, replaced by an uncomfortable awareness that maybe they'd misjudged this old man. But he couldn't afford to let up now, not with his career on the line. "That's all very impressive, Mr. Connor," Hayes said, recovering his authority. "And I mean that sincerely. Your service is appreciated. But combat experience from 1991 doesn't qualify you to work on a 2024 tank. The systems are completely different. The hydraulics are the same," James said. He'd moved to a different section of the tank now, pressing his ear against the hull near the turret ring. "Fluid dynamics don't change. Physics don't change. The computer that controls it got fancier, sure. But the actual mechanism, the pump, the lines, the actuators, that's all still mechanical. Still metal moving against metal. Still fluid under pressure." He tapped the hull gently with his knuckle, listening to the sound it made. Then he moved 6 inches to the left and tapped again. To Hayes, both taps sounded exactly the same. But James frowned, his weathered face creasing even deeper. "There," he said quietly. He marked the spot with his finger and looked up at Hayes. "Your problem's right here, about 8 inches inside the hull. There's a pressure relief valve that's partially seized. Not completely. That's why your diagnostics are reading nominal. But enough that when you try to build full traverse pressure, the valve can't handle the load properly. Creates a feedback loop. The computer compensates, which makes the problem worse, which makes the computer compensate more, and so on, until the system protects itself by shutting down." The maintenance bay was dead silent. Hayes stared at him. That's impossible. We've checked every valve in the system. Twice. Not this one." James pointed at the spot he'd marked. "This one's buried. You can't reach it with standard tools. Can't even see it without pulling the entire turret off. Takes about 40 hours of work with a full crew to access it through conventional means. Then how do you expect to—" James held up the ugly wrench again. "This can reach it, through the inspection port here." He indicated a small access panel that Hayes had barely noticed, partially hidden behind a cable bundle. "Angle's tricky. Tight squeeze. But it can be done." Captain Hayes felt his world tilting. "How could you possibly know that? You haven't even run any diagnostics. You just touched the tank." "I listened," James said simply. "When you tried to traverse earlier, I heard it. The system's got a voice, Captain. A rhythm. When something's wrong, the rhythm changes. Gets syncopated, like a drummer missing a beat. You learn to hear it after a while." One of the engineers, a woman named Lieutenant Park, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. "Sir, I think he might be right. I pulled the maintenance logs from the Army's historical database while you two were talking." There's a technical bulletin from 1992, classified until 2018, about a series of mysterious turret failures in M1A1 tanks during Desert Storm. The solution was... She looked at her tablet, then at James, her expression stunned. A field-expedient repair procedure developed by maintenance crews in 3rd Armored Division. They used custom-fabricated tools to access a valve that couldn't be reached conventionally. Hayes felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. What? It's all here, sir. The procedure was eventually incorporated into official maintenance protocols, but only for emergency field repairs. The assumption was that regular depot maintenance would catch the problem before it became critical. But if a tank went straight from depot to a training exercise without full field use... She trailed off, the implication clear. This tank had come straight from depot-level maintenance to Fort Carson. It had been used for light training, nothing that would stress the systems enough to reveal the fault. Until now, when they needed it ready for deployment. Sergeant Rodriguez moved to James's side, looking at the spot the old man had marked. Master Gunner, you're saying you can fix this? Now? If the captain here doesn't have me arrested first. James looked at Hayes, and there was no challenge in his eyes, just a quiet, patient certainty. Your call, Captain. You can keep running diagnostics for another 3 days and miss your deployment, or you can let me try. Worst case, I'm wrong, and you're no worse off than you are now. Best case, you've got your tank back in an hour. Hayes stood frozen, caught between his pride, his training, and the ticking clock of his deadline. Every instinct told him this was insane. You didn't let a civilian, no matter how experienced, perform unauthorized maintenance on a modern battle tank. The regulations were clear. The chain of command was sacred. He could end his career right here with one bad decision. But that career was already on fire if he couldn't get this tank running. He looked at Rodriguez, searching for guidance. The senior NCO gave him the slightest nod, a silent message. Trust him. Fine, Hayes said, the word tasting like defeat. You have 1 hour, Mr. Connor. If you can't fix it by then... I'm calling General Clark myself and telling him this was a waste of time. James simply nodded and opened his tool bag. As James began his work, moving with surprising efficiency despite his age, Sergeant Rodriguez pulled out his phone and stepped away from the group. He'd spent 24 years in the Army, long enough to know when something important was happening. And he had a feeling that Captain Hayes needed to understand exactly who he'd just insulted. He dialed the number for the division's G1 office, personnel records. He had a friend there, a warrant officer who owed him a favor. Rodriguez, what do you need? The voice answered. I need you to pull a service record for me. James Connor, Master Gunner, retired. 3rd Armored Division during Desert Storm. Give me 2 minutes. Rodriguez watched James work. The old man had removed the access panel and was now doing something with that bizarre custom wrench, his movements precise despite the awkward angle. Around him, the engineering team had gathered, watching in fascinated silence. The phone buzzed. Rodriguez? You still there? Yeah, go ahead. Holy hell, where did you find this guy? His friend's voice had gone from casual to reverent. James Connor, enlisted 1969, right after high school, served 2 tours in Vietnam as a tanker with the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, stayed in after the war when half the Army was getting downsized, made Master Gunner in 1985, deployed to Desert Storm in 1990 with 3rd Armored Division. I knew that part. What else? What else? Jesus, Rodriguez, this guy is a legend. Hold on, let me read you his citations. Bronze Star with V device for valor. 2 Army Commendation Medals with V device. Purple Heart, and... Wait, this can't be right. What? He's got a Silver Star, awarded for actions on February 26, 1991. Says here his tank company came under surprise attack from an Iraqi Republican Guard Brigade. Their fire control systems were damaged. Instead of withdrawing, Connor climbed out of the turret under enemy fire and directed his gunner onto targets using hand signals and a pair of binoculars. They destroyed 4 enemy tanks and held their position until reinforcements arrived. preventing a breakthrough that could have endangered the entire division flank. Rodriguez felt his throat tighten. He looked at James, who was now deep inside the tank's access port, muttering to himself about angles and torque. "There's more," his friend continued. After the war, he stayed in as a senior master gunner, became the Army's go-to expert on M1 Abrams field repairs, developed or refined over 30 different emergency repair procedures. Some of them are still in the manual today, though most people don't know who created them. He retired in 2001 as a master sergeant, lives in Colorado Springs. The notes say he still does occasional consulting work for Army Materiel Command when they've got a problem nobody else can solve. "Why isn't he more well-known?" Rodriguez asked. "Because he never wanted to be. Says here he declined multiple offers to be an instructor at the armor school, turned down positions with defense contractors, just wanted to go home and work in peace. The general, General Clark, served under Connor as a lieutenant back in the 90s. Apparently he's one of the few people Connor will still help when asked." Rodriguez ended the call and walked over to Lieutenant Park. "Pull up the database again, search for Connor and field expedient repairs." She did. Her eyes went wide. "Oh my God! Sir, half the emergency procedures in our manual, they're all attributed to M. Sergeant J. Connor, the valve bypass technique, the alternative traverse method, the hydraulic line splice procedure. He wrote them all." "What?" Hayes had been listening. He moved to look over Park's shoulder at the screen. "Captain," Park said quietly, "we've been using this man's work for the past 3 days. Every time we consulted the manual for an alternative approach, we were following procedures he developed." Before Hayes could respond, there was a metallic clank from inside the tank's access port, followed by James's satisfied grunt. "There we go," the old man said, pulling himself out of the tight space. His shirt was smeared with grease, and there was a small cut on his knuckle that was bleeding slowly. But he was smiling. "Valve was seized exactly like I thought. Just needed the right persuasion." He stood up, wincing as his back protested, and wiped his hands on an oil rag. "Captain, you want to give her a try?" Hayes stood frozen, his mind reeling from what he'd just learned. This man, this old man he'd mocked, dismissed, and nearly had removed by security, had literally written the book they'd been using to try to fix the problem. "Sir?" James prompted gently. "The tank?" Hayes climbed into the commander's hatch, his movements mechanical. He powered up the turret control system, heard the familiar whine of hydraulics building pressure. He pressed the traverse control. The turret moved. Smoothly, silently, perfectly. He traversed left, then right. Full rotation. The movement was glass smooth, exactly as it should be. The diagnostic panel showed all green. System nominal. And this time, it was actually true. Hayes climbed out of the tank, his legs unsteady. The maintenance bay was silent, except for the soft hum of the fluorescent lights and the quiet tick of the cooling turret system. "How?" Hayes's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "How did you do that?" James was packing up his tools, arranging them carefully in their worn slots in the canvas roll. "Told you. I listened. Same problem we had in the desert. Same fix. Just needed to know where to look and what to look for." "Sir, Hayes stopped. Every word he'd said earlier came flooding back. Every dismissive comment. Every insult. The shame hit him like a physical weight. "Master Sergeant Connor, I owe you an apology. You were doing your job," James said simply. "Following your training. Trusting your tools. Nothing wrong with that. You're young yet. You'll learn that sometimes the old ways and the new ways need each other. But I had no idea who you were. If you'd known, you would have treated me different. But respect shouldn't come from knowing someone's rank or reading their medals. It should come from recognizing that just because someone's methods look different from yours doesn't mean they're wrong." The words landed like a sledgehammer. Hayes felt his face burn. The maintenance bay doors suddenly rolled open with a metallic roar. A command vehicle pulled in, tires squealing. The door flew open and Major General Clark stepped out, 2 stars glittering on his collar. His face thunderous. Every person in the base snapped to attention. Clark's eyes swept the scene, taking in the frozen engineers, the guilty-looking captain, and the old man calmly rolling up his tool bag. His gaze settled on James, and his expression transformed. "Master Sergeant Connor." The general's voice rang through the bay like a bell. Then he did something that made every jaw in the building drop. He saluted. Not a casual salute. A sharp, formal, regulation-perfect salute. The kind of salute you give to someone who outranks you. The kind you give to someone you respect more than words can express. James straightened up despite his aching back and returned the salute with equal precision. A muscle memory from decades of service. "General," he said simply. Clark held the salute for a long moment, then dropped his hand. "I got a call from my sergeant major. He said there was a problem down here, that Captain Hayes was about to make the worst mistake of his career." Hayes felt his stomach drop through the floor. Clark turned to face him, and his expression was glacier cold. "Captain Hayes, front and center." Hayes marched forward, his heart hammering. This was it. His career was over. He'd be lucky if they let him resign instead of facing charges for how he'd treated Connor. "Sir, do you have any idea," Clark said, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority, "who you were talking to?" I just found out, sir. Master Sergeant Connor, his service record doesn't capture the half of it." Clark's eyes bore into him. James Connor isn't just a retired master sergeant, he's a living legend. When I was a brand new lieutenant in 1994, fresh out of West Point and convinced I knew everything, I was assigned to a tank company. Master Sergeant Connor was my platoon sergeant. The general's voice softened slightly, memory coloring his words. "We had a tank throw a track during field exercises. Middle of nowhere. Battalion commander was breathing down our necks about timeline. I wanted to call for a recovery vehicle. Wait for proper equipment. By-the-book solution. Connor asked me to give him 2 hours. I said no. He asked again, politely, firmly. So I said yes, because there was something in his voice that told me he knew something I didn't." Clark smiled, a brief flash of warmth in his stern expression. "He fixed that track with a come-along, some scrap lumber, and 3 privates. Took him 90 minutes. Taught me more about leadership and problem-solving in those 90 minutes than 4 years at West Point had. He taught me that experience matters. That sometimes the old ways work better than the new ways, and that respecting your NCOs and learning from them isn't weakness. It's wisdom." He turned back to Hayes. "You're a fine officer, Captain. Smart, educated, dedicated. But you've got a critical flaw, and if you don't fix it, it'll destroy your career faster than any mechanical failure. You look at your tools, your technology, your degrees, your manuals, and you think they make you superior to anyone who doesn't have them. That's not confidence. That's arrogance, and arrogance kills soldiers." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fired round. Hayes stood at attention, his face burning, unable to meet anyone's eyes. "James Connor," Clark continued, addressing the room now, "has forgotten more about tank maintenance than most of us will ever learn. The procedures you've been using, half of them came from him. The field expedient repairs in your manual, he developed them under fire, in combat, when failure meant people died. He's been inducted into the Armor Hall of Fame at Fort Benning. He's got a Distinguished Service Medal that I personally recommended him for before he retired. And he's solved problems for this Army that would have cost millions of dollars and months of downtime." The general walked to where James stood and extended his hand. They shook, the grip firm and full of mutual respect. "James, thank you for coming. I know you don't like to leave your workshop." "You called, General. That means it was important." James glanced at the now-functioning tank. "Besides, she's a good machine, deserved to be fixed right." Clark nodded, then turned back to Hayes. His voice hardened again. "Captain, You're going to do three things. First, you're going to apologize to Master Sergeant Connor, properly. Second, you're going to write a detailed after-action report about this incident, and you're going to include a full account of your mistakes and what you learned from them. That report will go in your file. Third, you're going to spend the next 60 days in a special program I'm instituting, effective immediately. Hayes swallowed. Sir? It's called the Master Gunner Mentorship Program. You and every other junior officer in this division who thinks their degree makes them an expert. You're going to spend 2 months learning from our retired NCOs and warrant officers, not in a classroom, in their garages, in their workshops, in VFW halls. You're going to learn what experience actually means. And maybe, just maybe, you'll come out of it with some humility. Yes, sir, Hayes managed. Clark's expression softened fractionally. You're not a bad officer, Hayes. You've got potential. But potential means nothing if you can't learn to listen to people who know more than you do. Consider this a gift, a chance to fix yourself before your arrogance gets someone killed. He turned to address the entire maintenance bay, his voice rising. Let this be a lesson for all of you. Technology is a tool. Education is a tool. But they're not substitutes for experience and wisdom. The Army runs on its NCOs and its enlisted soldiers, the people who actually turn the wrenches, fire the weapons, and make the mission happen. Officers who forget that don't last long, and they sure as hell don't earn anyone's respect. He looked at James one more time. Thank you, Master Sergeant. As always, the Army owes you a debt. James just nodded. He finished packing his tool bag, zipped it closed, and headed for the door. As he passed Hayes, he paused. Captain, he said quietly, you've got good instincts. You're thorough. You care about getting it right. Don't lose those qualities. Just remember that there's more than one way to be right. Then he was gone, walking out into the Colorado sunshine, just another old man in a flannel shirt. The maintenance bay remained silent for a long moment after he left. Then Sergeant Rodriguez cleared his throat. Sir, he said to Hayes, permission to speak freely? Hayes nodded, not trusting his voice. What the Master Sergeant did today? That's something you need to remember for the rest of your career. He didn't come here to embarrass you. He came to fix the tank. He could have made you look like a fool in front of the general, but he didn't. He gave you an out, gave you a chance to save face. That's what real leaders do. They accomplish the mission and take care of people at the same time. Hayes nodded slowly. The shame was still there, but beneath it, something else was growing. A determination to be better, to do better. All right, he said to his team, his voice steadier now. Let's document Master Sergeant Connor's repair procedure, every step. I want it written up and submitted to the technical manual office within 48 hours. And I want his name on it, properly credited. Lieutenant Park looked up from her tablet. Sir, I've already started. I documented everything he did. Good. Also, I want full maintenance logs pulled for every M1A2 in the division. We're going to check them all for this valve issue. If Connor found it here, it could be happening elsewhere. The team moved with new energy, purposeful now instead of frustrated. They'd learned something today that no classroom could teach. Hayes looked at the tank, smoothly operational now, ready for deployment, and made himself a promise. He would complete General Clark's mentorship program, and he would never, ever again dismiss someone because they didn't fit his expectations of what an expert should look like. 6 weeks later, Captain Hayes pulled his car into the parking lot of the Colorado Springs VFW Post 4051. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and the place was quiet. Inside, past the wood-paneled walls decorated with military memorabilia and faded photographs, he found what he was looking for. James Connor sat at a corner table with 3 other veterans, all older men, all with that same weathered look of people who'd seen things they didn't talk about much. Spread on the table between them was a disassembled carburetor from what looked like a 1960s Ford pickup, along with various tools and shop rags. Hayes stood in the doorway for a moment, uncertain. He was out of uniform, wearing jeans and a polo shirt. He felt awkward, out of place. James looked up and saw him. Something flickered in those pale blue eyes. Not surprise, just acknowledgement. He gestured to an empty chair. Hayes crossed the room and sat down. The other veterans nodded to him but didn't stop their work. "Master Sergeant," Hayes began, then stopped. He'd rehearsed what he wanted to say a dozen times on the drive over, but now the words felt inadequate. James saved him. He picked up a small brass jet from the carburetor, holding it up to the light. "You know what this is?" he asked. "No, sir." "This," James said, "is where you learn to listen. It's tiny, easy to overlook, but if it's dirty or worn, the whole engine runs rough. No diagnostic computer in the world will tell you it's the problem. You have to know where to look. You have to understand how all the parts work together, and you have to respect the fact that sometimes the smallest things matter most." He set the jet down and looked at Hayes directly. "So, you here to learn, or you here to apologize again?" Hayes felt himself smile for the first time in weeks. "Learn, sir, if you're willing to teach." James nodded slowly, a hint of approval in his expression. "Pull up that chair. We'll start with basics." As Hayes leaned in to study the carburetor, one of the other veterans, a grizzled man with a 1st Cavalry Division cap, spoke up. "Fair warning, son. Master Sergeant Connor's teaching method involves a lot of listening, a lot of dirty hands, and exactly zero bullshit. You ready for that?" Hayes thought about the past 6 weeks. The humility he'd learned, the veterans he'd met, the stories he'd heard, the wisdom that came from experience no classroom could provide. "Yes, sir," he said. "I'm ready." James Connor picked up a wrench, not the famous battle-scarred one, but a regular socket wrench from a hardware store, and handed it to Hayes. "Then let's get started." Outside, the Colorado sun was setting, painting the mountains gold and purple. Inside the VFW hall, an old master sergeant and a young captain bent over a disassembled engine, one teaching, one learning, both understanding that this was how knowledge survived, passed down through hands and voices from one generation to the next. Some lessons can't be found in books. Some wisdom can't be programmed into computers. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is recognize when you don't know something and find someone who does. To everyone who typed respect and shared where you're watching from, thank you for standing with our veterans who proved their worth when it mattered most. Subscribe for more stories of unsung American heroes like this.